prison meals exposed the shocking truth about inmate food behind bars. Don't miss the next case. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. The photos hit the news first. Plastic trays lined with gray meat, mold-speckled bread, and something that barely resembled soup. But what sent shockwaves through the nation wasn't just the images. It was what happened to inmate Larry Mayfield, a 42-year-old prisoner at the Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Michigan. In February 2015, Larry collapsed in the prison cafeteria during lunch. Fellow inmates yelled for help as his body convulsed on the cold, concrete floor. The guards didn't move fast. At first, they thought he was faking it. But when foam began to spill from his mouth, panic broke through the silence. By the time medical staff arrived, Larry was gone. The official cause? Food poisoning. But from what? The answer would unravel a scandal stretching far beyond one prison and straight into the contracts that fed hundreds of thousands of inmates across the United States. It all began months earlier when complaints started flooding in about Aramark Correctional Services, the private company responsible for serving meals to Michigan's prisons. Inmates said their food was spoiled, undercooked, and crawling with maggots. Some claimed they found mouse droppings mixed into their rice. Guards noticed trays being thrown away uneaten, and tensions inside the cafeteria began to boil. One former kitchen worker, a low-paid employee brought in by Aramark, would later tell investigators that she was ordered to stretch meat supplies by mixing in expired leftovers from previous days. "If it smells bad, just add more seasoning," she said her supervisor told her. That same week, Larry Mayfield started complaining of stomach pains. Soon after his death, photos leaked, grainy images of maggots writhing inside food containers. They spread across social media like wildfire. Families of inmates began protesting outside the facility, holding signs that read, "They're still human." Inside, chaos erupted. Inmates refused to eat. Guards were forced to wear masks as the stench of rot filled the halls. State officials tried to control the damage, insisting it was an isolated incident. But former employees came forward, describing widespread negligence and deliberate cost-cutting. Every testimony pointed toward the same dark truth. The meals meant to sustain inmates were slowly poisoning them. When investigators finally searched the prison's kitchen, what they found confirmed their worst fears: unlabeled containers, boxes of expired meat, and rotting vegetables hidden in a storage freezer. But there was something else that made one inspector step back in disbelief. Behind the freezer door, buried under stacked trays of spoiled chicken, was a sealed envelope, addressed to the warden himself. And inside was a list of inmate names marked with red ink. Each one had recently fallen ill after eating. The question was, why were their names being tracked? When investigators questioned Warden Thomas Riker, his answers were rehearsed, almost mechanical. He denied any knowledge of the list, claiming it must have been part of a routine health tracking effort. But as reporters and state officials began digging deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged, one that connected more than a dozen similar incidents across multiple Michigan prisons, all linked to the same food contractor, Aramark Correctional Services. By the summer of 2015, complaints had escalated into full-blown riots. At Conross Correctional Facility, hundreds of inmates refused to return to their cells after being served meatloaf described as gray and crawling. One correctional officer later admitted that when he lifted a tray, the food moved. Guards were outnumbered and terrified. What started as a protest over meals exploded into chaos, fires, lockdowns, and brutal clashes that left several inmates and officers injured. Behind the walls, rumors spread like wildfire. Some inmates whispered that certain prisoners were being deliberately fed spoiled food as punishment for filing grievances. Others believed someone inside the kitchen was keeping score, deciding who would get the safe meals and who wouldn't. One name on that red ink list stood out: Marcus Dean, Larry Mayfield's cellmate. Marcus had survived the same lunch that killed Larry, and now he was terrified to eat anything served to him. During a state inspection, he slipped a note to one of the investigators, warning them that someone inside was making deals with the food supplier to cover up the deaths. That note would become a turning point. Investigators soon uncovered internal Aramark emails that painted a chilling picture of corporate greed. Managers discussed how to cut corners to meet profit targets, reducing food portions, substituting ingredients, and ignoring expiration dates. But buried deep within those emails was one message that stopped everyone cold, a warning from a regional supervisor sent weeks before Larry's death. It read simply, "If they get sick, settle it quietly." Public outrage reached a boiling point. Lawmakers demanded hearings, families of inmates filed lawsuits, and journalists began to expose how the state had renewed Aramark's multi-million-dollar contract despite dozens of violations. Every layer revealed something worse: meals prepared in unsanitary conditions, untrained workers, and reports of staff smuggling contraband in food shipments. Then came the most chilling discovery yet. During a second kitchen inspection, one officer opened a hidden storage compartment behind a rusted oven panel. Inside were several sealed containers labeled non-distribution stock. But when they cracked them open, the smell hit first: rot, chemicals, and something else they couldn't immediately place. Inside those containers were bags of powdered food mix stamped with an expiration date, 2008. Nearly 7 years old. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Scribbled across the lids in black marker were the words, "Do not use unless ordered by Riker." And that's when investigators realized this wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate. By early 2016, the scandal had broken wide open. News stations across the country ran the story nightly. Prison meals scandal. Are inmates being poisoned for profit? State investigators now had evidence of deliberate negligence, and all signs pointed to Warden Thomas Riker. But proving intent was another story. Every time a new witness came forward, their statement was suddenly retracted. Employees who had spoken to journalists found themselves fired, or worse, missing. Then came the disappearance of Marcus Dean, the inmate who had warned investigators about the cover-up. He vanished from his cell one night during a facility-wide lockdown. His personal items, letters, photos, even his Bible, were left neatly folded on his bed. Prison officials claimed he'd been transferred, but no paperwork existed. His family never saw or heard from him again. It was as if he'd been erased. Public pressure mounted until the Michigan Department of Corrections finally terminated its contract with Aramark. But even after the company was gone, the damage lingered. Dozens of inmates hospitalized, several dead, and an entire state asking how this could happen inside a system meant to uphold the law. As journalists and state auditors pieced together the truth, they found a paper trail connecting Riker to massive kickbacks from food suppliers. He had authorized the use of expired ingredients in exchange for under-the-table payments disguised as maintenance bonuses. The envelopes, the list of sick inmates, it was all part of a quiet scheme to hide the fallout while keeping profits intact. When agents finally raided Riker's home in suburban Lansing, they found ledgers, offshore bank account records, and something even more disturbing: a locked metal box in his basement. Inside were letters from inmates begging for medical attention, some smeared with food stains and dated just days before their deaths. Each one was stamped, "Rejected, no action." Riker was arrested and charged with bribery, criminal negligence, and obstruction of justice. But before he could face trial, he collapsed in his cell, his dinner tray still untouched beside him. The cause of death? Acute food poisoning. To this day, no one knows how spoiled food ended up on the warden's own tray. Some say it was poetic justice. Others believe someone inside the prison made sure he paid the same price as those he betrayed. After Riker's death, more states began reviewing their prison food contracts. Investigations spread to Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania, each revealing eerily similar reports of tainted food and hidden kickbacks. In the end, the scandal wasn't just about rotten meals. It was about a system that treated food as currency, lives as numbers, and silence as policy. Because behind every tray of gray meat and moldy bread was a message: this is what happens when profit outweighs humanity. And as one former inmate later said in a haunting TV interview, "They say prison is where you pay for your crimes. But inside, it's not always the guilty who suffer." If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one, hit subscribe, because the truth behind bars is only getting darker.